to walk you through how to do an image transfer on clay. So you'll notice how I start out by measuring the height of my pot. This works really well with straight surfaces, so pots that go straight up and down, or plates that are slumped or draped and are very close to being very even and flat. So my pot is 4 inches tall, so I'm going to cut a strip of newsprint paper that is 4 inches high and then the length of the paper. What I'll do then is I'll actually wrap it around my pot to see how much paper I actually need, and then I'll cut it to the length that is appropriate. Next, on our newsprint, we're going to use a bottle, a squirt bottle filled with black underglaze. So I shake it up really well, and I want to make sure that I kind of squeeze it into a rag first to make sure it comes out. And then I'm actually going to draw my design. These are going to be my outlines. So anywhere you put this glaze, it's going to look like an outline, a contour line drawing with this underglaze. You want to make sure that you don't make it too puddled in areas or too thick in areas, because it will spread out when you go to put it onto your pot. If you can have a really consistent thin line for all of it, that would be ideal. Also, be careful not to let your bottle, the nozzle of your bottle, drag on your newsprint, because then you'll end up with an inconsistent line. Here you can see my design. Some areas I got a little thick, which can be a bit of a pain. Next, you can use a hairdryer to dry it. You want to make sure that the underglaze is completely dry before you go on to the next step, or else it will smear and create some problems when you start adding your pigments, or your pigmented slip is what we're going to be using for the next part. Next, I'm preparing my pigmented slip. Here I'm using purple. It already has the pigments in it. You just want to make sure that it is thin enough that you can paint it onto your surface. So you can layer these if you need to, although they will turn out really, really thick if you put too much on. Here I'm putting it on kind of gingerly because I didn't do a great job of making sure that my underglaze was completely dry before I started. It's a little too rushed, but it ends up fine in the end. So the thinner you put it on, you want to put it on thick enough that it's actually going to show up and, you know, be opaque on your piece, but you also don't want to make it so thick that you actually thicken the walls of your pot. Once the slip dries completely, the colored slip, then I'm going to coat over the entire thing with just regular white slip. Now you want to make sure, I'm using a glazing brush for this, you want to make sure it's even, and you want to make sure that it covers everything, and also that the slip is thin enough, so enough water is added to it, and that it isn't chunky slip. So you want to use a really smooth and liquefied slip for this process. You also want to make sure that your other pigmented slips are completely dry when you do this. So you can use a hairdryer to dry them, and then once they're dry, you can go ahead and do this process right here. Next, you're ready to actually apply your image transfer. You want to make sure that the slip that you have, this last layer, is dry enough that it's not super liquidy, like it's not going to drip, but it also has a little bit of a sheen to it. You also want to kind of moisten the edges of your pot before you begin. You're going to apply your paper evenly around and you're going to press it on. The next thing you need to do is you need to add even pressure. It's almost like you're rubbing the image onto your pot. So here I'm using a rib, which you can use. You can also use your fingers, but you want to make sure that you're pressing the paper into your surface so that the image actually transfers. Now it's time to see if our image transfer is actually working. So we start slowly peeling the paper away, and you can see some parts where it's sticking really well to the clay and other parts where it looks a little bit more distressed. That's kind of the cool thing about the image transfer process, is how it can look distressed in some areas. If you start peeling it away and you notice that large chunks of it are coming away as well, you can stop, pull it back, and rub it into the clay a little bit more before you move on to the next step. When you're finished, what you'll end up is not going to be perfect. You have to remember that. The whole point of it is to look somewhat distressed and interesting like this. You can see where the slip is kind of pulling away, and so I'm actually going to add a little bit of water to it to push in the parts where I feel like it's pulling away, just so they don't become spiky bits in the end that actually pull away from the clay even more so than they already are. So I'm kind of smoothing out some of my edges that are sticking up here with just like sticking my fingers into a cup of water. I can also use a metal rib or wooden rib to kind of push in the parts that I want to push in without using water if I'd like to. Sometimes that works better for some of the edges. Here you can see what I have. Again, it's a distressed look, which can be kind of interesting. You might decide to put a handle on the side where you can kind of see the two pieces where they join together. That might make it more interesting, or make a great flower pot as well.